was or where he was from. And he was the only Christian or the only person I even knew that had, I mean, I didn't know, it wasn't like I could pop into the pastor at the church and ask him. So I decided in the middle of the week, I'm going to buy a Bible. I told my friend, I'm going to buy a Bible. My friend said, you're going to do what? I'm going to go buy a Bible. He said, what in the world are you going to do that for? I said, I don't know, I think I ought to buy a Bible. Man, I didn't know how expensive Bibles were, I mean, I went down into this bookstore and started looking for a Bible. This was no lie. In those days, we were between dope shipments, and I had about $5 to my name. That's about it, $5 or $6. I was eating the scraps from my fraternity house kitchen because I didn't have enough money to buy the food. I would serve the meals, and they let me eat the leftovers. I mean, that's where I was. So, I went in and I finally found a little itsy-bitsy, teensy-weensy paperback Bible that was like $3 or something. $2.50, $3. Well, that was 50% of my life savings at that point. So I was in line to buy it, and my friend is not a Christian. He was the guy who told me that maybe you're really the one who's so bad off. He said, look, Lon, I don't know what you're doing. He said, but if this God you're talking about is so real, don't you think he's big enough he can give you a Bible without you having to spend 50% of the money you got on a Bible? I said, well, that sounds spiritual. So I put the Bible back. Now, let me tell you why that's significant. I didn't know anybody with a Bible. See, we as Christians, we forget this. I mean, people weren't going around reading their Bibles, and people weren't going around giving Bibles out. I even said to him, I said, now, where in the world am I going to get a Bible from? Who in the world is going to give me a Bible? I've never owned one. I've never seen one. My fraternity brothers definitely didn't have any. Where am I going to get a Bible from? But I said, look, you're right, because I didn't want to spend the money for it anyway. So the next Saturday, I got up early in the morning, which in those days was about, 8:30, 9 o'clock, and went downtown and sat down on a stoop downtown and just waited. I was waiting for this guy to come to town. I don't know what I would have done if this guy hadn't come to town. I don't think I could have made another week. But anyway, just faithful as ever, around 10 o'clock, this guy comes putting into town, this old Econoline van, and pulls up in his parking space, or some parking space. And I went over to him and I said, look, I've been waiting for you all week. You and I have got to talk. There's got to be a sales pitch. That was the word I used. I didn't know any words. So there's got to be a sales pitch that goes with all this stuff you do. I would really like to hear your sales pitch. I'd really like to hear what in the world it is you're selling out here. He said, well, I'm not selling anything. I said, well, then just tell me what you're all about. So he took the Bible. He had a Bible. And for about 2 hours just began sharing with me what it meant to know Jesus Christ. He went back in the Old Testament and talked from the New Testament, and he just, and man, it was like pouring water on a dry sponge. I mean, I just couldn't get enough. He talked and I listened. He talked and I listened. Every new story he turned to was brand new for me. I didn't know a lot of these stories. He turned to Elijah on Mount Carmel and talked about how the prophets of Baal were destroyed and about the true God. And, man, I thought that's the greatest story I ever heard. I thought that was fantastic, And he witnessed and just told me all about the Lord. Well, at the end of a couple hours, he said, well, would you like to ask Jesus in your life? I don't know. What does that mean? Well, he didn't really explain it to me that much. I said, no, I don't think so. You got to understand I'm Jewish, and this is all new to me. And I said, I'm going to have to think about this, okay? He said, fine. He said, I said, so I'll talk to you again sometime. So I started to walk off, and he said, hey, he said, do you have a Bible? I said, no. So he said, come here a minute. He opens the back of this truck, and he's got a whole box full of these brand new Bibles. I mean, he must have had 50 of them in there. He pulls out this Bible, and he says, here. Well, this was getting too real for me now. This was really getting scary. Because you got to understand where I was coming from. People do not go around handing out Bibles in Chapel Hill. I mean, this was unheard of. This is the first Bible I'd ever seen in my whole life up close. The first real Bible I'd ever held. I'd held Hebrew Bibles that you just read ritualistically out of, but this was a real English Bible. He handed me this, and I said, well, I don't have any money to pay. He said, it's free. I couldn't deal with this. I'm going, I got to get out of here, This is really scary. I mean, because I had said that week, God, if you're really real, give me a Bible. And here, bingo, this guy hands me a Bible. So I left him. I said, look, I'll talk to you maybe next week. And I'm walking down the street going, something, this is really frightening. I mean, what are the odds some guy's going to give me a Bible? So I went home, and he said, you ought to start reading it. So I've never read the Bible, so I figured, all right, where do you start? You start at the beginning. So I turned to Genesis, and I started reading. That was very interesting. I'd heard of Adam and Eve before. I'd never heard the story of what happened, so I read it. I thought, that's very interesting. Then I got to the section where so-and-so begat, so-and-so begat, so-and-so begat, so-and-so. I didn't know if it ever ended. So I just said, no, this does not get me anywhere. This is not helping at all. I thought, maybe I ought to read the New Testament. That's where Jesus is. I'll read the New Testament. So I didn't know whether the New Testament went, introduction, main body, conclusion, anticlimax. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know whether it was a novel or an anthology. So I figured, well, start at the beginning. Always a good rule. So I opened the Gospel according to Matthew and just started reading. Man, I got to tell you something, fellas. I had never read anything like that in my whole life. I mean, Jesus said more in one sentence than philosophy professors I'd had said in a whole semester. You know what I'm saying? The way that stuff that he said could just cut through and right to the core of the matter was just incredible. I couldn't believe it. I used to read 15, 20 minutes at night before I'd go to bed, because I like to read before I go to bed. And I'd lay in bed and I'd read the Bible. Man, this was awesome stuff. I think I read the Sermon on the Mount about 6 times in a row before I could actually go on. This is the most incredible stuff I'd ever read in my life. And I think the thing that impressed me so much was the power, the way he used words. It was the most incredible thing I had ever seen. The way it could cut right to the issues of life. So I started reading on a little more, and I finally got to Matthew 11, where Jesus said, come to me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. You will find peace for your souls. Man, when I read that, I remember taking the Bible, closing it up like this and saying, good night. That is exactly what I'm looking for. I couldn't have even verbalized it. I didn't have the words. I didn't know what I was looking for. But when I read him verbalize it, I said, bingo. That's what I'm looking for. Now, he says he can give it to me. Do I believe that? I sat there for a long time, and I thought, now how in the world is he going to give me that? But I figured, well, I tried everything else. I tried Buddhism. I tried Taoism. I tried Confucianism. I tried Judaism. I tried drugs. I gave them all a fair shot. So he deserves a fair shot. This is how I reasoned. I figure, all right, I'll give him a fair shot. I mean, if he says he can do it, let's give him a try. So I said, all right, now what do I do? Well, I don't know any Christians. So the guy says, ask Jesus in your life. What in the world does that mean? See, we got to understand, those words are non-sequiturs to a guy who is not familiar with our lingo. See, ask Jesus in your life. What in the world is that? So I didn't know what that meant. He talked to me once about receiving Jesus. Well, that was even, I didn't have the slightest idea what he was talking about. If a guy had said, stand on your head and spit nickels, I'd have had some idea physically what to do first, But when he says, ask Jesus in your life, I don't have the slightest idea what that means. So I sat around, I thought about that. I said, man, I don't know what that means. So I said, I'm just on my own here. So I got down on my knees, because that seemed appropriate. And I started praying, and I said something to the effect of saying, look, God, I don't know if you're real. And this Jesus character, I'm really confused about, But I'm in real trouble, and I really need help, and he's standing here and saying he can help me. He's standing here saying, come to me, and he'll give me peace and rest. So I said, look, I tell you what I want to do here. I said, this guy downtown is telling me I need to ask Jesus in my life, and I don't have the slightest idea what he's even talking about. But I tell you what I'll do. I said, God, I'm going to give you my life for a month. You have it for a month. and in that month, if you can prove good on this promise, if you can show me that you'll give me rest to my soul and peace, then you can have it for good. And if you can't, then I reserve the right to cancel the bargain. That seemed reasonable, right? If God's God, in the month long enough to do that? You got to remember, guys, I'm out in the spiritual boonies. I don't have anybody telling me, hey, you don't do that to God, buddy. You don't make deals with God. I didn't know that. It seemed to me if God was straightforward and God was legitimate and he knew my heart was right, that ought to be enough. So that was the deal I made. Got up and said, then I said to myself, I said, God, I'll do anything you want me to do in this month, you just tell me. I don't know how in the world he's going to tell me anything, but I figured, all right, that's fair. And I was serious, man. I was as serious as could be. I'd given everything else a wholehearted shot, and I was going to give this a wholehearted shot. I was skeptical, I got to tell you, I was skeptical, but hopeful. Then I decided, something, maybe I'm just crazy. Maybe I really have lost my mind. What am I doing? So I said, no, God, I'm going to need more than just a nice warm feeling on the inside. Now, my dog had the mange. You know what the mange is? The mange is when all the hair falls off. And I was rubbing this ointment on him, and he wouldn't do it. He was getting worse. He wasn't getting any better. So I said, I know what I'm going to do. I said, all right, I got back down on my knees, and I said, all right, God, look. Before this deal is consummated here, I need to at least know you're real. Okay? I mean, that's fair, you know. At least it seemed fair to me. So I said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop using the medicine on my dog, and you heal him. You know, if you're God, I mean, he's just a dog. He's a dumb old dog, and you can make hair grow. If you own the universe, you can certainly turn around the mange. I mean, you know, that's a minor thing if you're really God. And if I'm going to turn my whole life over to you, I want to at least have a God who can handle a case of mange. You know, that was my thinking. You know, guys, this may sound humorous, but this is where I was. I mean, this is how I was thinking, you know, and I think God honored it not because this is the ideal way to come to the Lord, but just because I didn't know any better and my heart was sincere. It really was. I was just trying to be honest and trying to do what seemed best. Well, all I can tell you is the dog healed. I mean, you can pass it off as a throwback to the medicine if you want to, and I was tempted at times to do that. But I'm telling you, the dog healed up. I stopped using the medicine. The medicine had been doing no good, and within 2 or 3 days, the dog's hair had grown back. Now, you explain it any way you want to, but right then, I was really beginning to get scared. I said, this is really frightening, you know. I mean, I began to say, you know what? This whole thing may be real. And that's frightening, you know. I mean, I have backed into the God of the universe. I was really having trouble dealing with this. But God began really to do something internally. I mean, at the end of about a week, I can't explain to you in words. Any of you who know Jesus Christ know what I'm talking about. On the inside, I mean, things had flip-flopped. I couldn't explain it to anybody, but I knew experientially that God had moved into my life and I was different. There was a peace and there was a joy. There was also a contrition over sin. I remember one day during that week I was walking downtown and I felt awful. I felt so crummy and so dirty and so filthy before God, so hopeless, so completely tied up in my own selfishness that there was no hope out. And I saw a friend down there and he said to me, "You look awful. What's your problem?" I said, "Hey man, I wish I knew what my problem was. You know, my problem was sin. God was convicting me of sin. And I never felt that before. And yet I would get down on my knees and I would really deal with God and I'd get up feeling clean and whole." So about an end of a week, I mean, my dog's been healed. I'm feeling all this on the inside. Finally, I came back at about the end of the week and I got down on my knees again and I said, "Lord, you know something? I mean, I'm convinced. What do you want me to say? You know, I'm absolutely convinced. I don't have the slightest idea what I'm going to do now. I don't have the slightest idea what this means in terms of my life. But I told you could have my life and you can have it. I'll give it to you. It's yours. Now you just show me what to do and I'll do it." So I got up off my knees and I said, "Now what's going to happen?" Well, I didn't know what was going to happen. Actually, at the time, I was really wanted by the police in Chapel Hill for pushing dope. And as I used to say in those days, I was so hot the air crinkled when I walked around me. The police were looking for me. And finally, the next weekend, this man came to town again. And I walked up to him and I said, "Hey, let me tell you," I hadn't seen him in 2 or 3 weeks. So I said, "Let me tell you what happened." And I started telling him all of this. Well, this guy starts weeping like a baby, you know, and I'm going, "What's wrong with this guy? This guy's really nuts." You know what I'm saying? You know, and he hugs me and he starts screaming, "Praise the Lord." I didn't even know what praise the Lord meant, you know, and I never heard anybody say that before. And he tells his wife, and his wife comes out, and she's all excited, and she gives me a big hug, and she starts crying, and I was just standing there going, "Good night," you know. And he said to me, "Now you got to get baptized." I said, "Get baptized?" Yeah. And he showed me in the Bible where Jesus said you got to get baptized, you know, now as a public sign that you'd given your life to Him. Well, now this was something different, see, because going around talking about Jesus is one thing. When you're a Jew getting baptized, I mean, that's a completely different cake of worms here. So I said, "Man, I got to think about this." So I went home and I started thinking, hey, you know, if you're really serious about Jesus, If you're really serious about giving your life to Him, if this is what He says to do, you got to do it. But I started saying, man, if I go out and get baptized, I mean, what in the world are my parents? I mean, there's no way I'm going to be able to go home and tell my parents. They'd rather have me come home and tell them I'm using dope than that I go home and tell them I got baptized. So I debated this back and forth for about a week, and finally I said, you know what? If I'm really serious about God, I got to do it. So I went down. This guy baptized me in a little pond outside in Chapel Hill there. And then I decided, all right, now I'm going to hitchhike and tell my folks and all my relatives what I've done. So I hitchhiked up to Portsmouth, Virginia. I'm almost done here, fellas. And I called my grandparents up, and I said, get together with my aunt and uncle and their body. I got something very important I want to tell you. So they got the whole family together. My parents were in Atlanta, but I had all the rest of the family together. And I got to tell you, when I got to Portsmouth, which is where I grew up, some of you have heard this before, I didn't know where to stay. And I had my dog, so I knew none of my relatives were going to put me up. So I went, we had this black lady the whole time I was growing up. Excuse me, she was your typical nanny, or mammy that you see in these movies. You know, she was short, and fat, and lovable, and kind, and, you know, everything a mammy's supposed to be. And she was with me from the time I was about 2 months old until the time I went off to college. Her name was Cora Lee Goodman. And when I was down in Chapel Hill and we would sit in the back of this guy's van and sing a few hymns, boy, the hymns, these tunes sounded so familiar. Most amazing. You know, I'd say, man, I know I've heard this before. But then I'd say, how could you have heard this? You're a Jew. They didn't sing this in the synagogue. How could you have heard this? You know, and finally, as I began thinking back, I began remembering her humming these things when she'd be, you know, when I was just a little guy. I'd hear her humming these things while she was washing, or this black lady humming these things while she was ironing. So I said, I'll bet you she's a Christian. So I said, when I go up there, I'm going to tell her too. So I finally found her house. I'm walking through this black section of Portsmouth with this big afro and this big German shepherd and this knapsack on my back. And man, you know, everybody's kind of just looking at me. I finally found her house. I knocked on the door. She comes to the door, and I said, Cora. She didn't know who I was. You know, all this hair. And she said, who? And I said, this is Lon. Yeah, it's me. And she said, oh my goodness, you know, she just looked at me. And she said, what in the world are you doing here? I said, well, I wanted to come and tell you that I just asked Jesus Christ in my life and got saved, and I came up here to tell all my relatives about it. You know, she just threw her hands up, glory, hallelujah. I mean, you can see it. I mean, it was a sight. She grabbed me, gave me this big old bear hug in the doorway, you know, and she could do that. I mean, she could handle that. Brought me in the house. She sits down, starts weeping like a baby. You know, I'm going, what are all these people crying about, you know? So she said, Lon, I got to tell you. She said, I have been praying for you since I came to work at your house and when you were 2 months old. Can you believe that? She said, but I've got to tell you the truth. I never, ever believed I'd see the day when you'd walk into my house and tell me that you'd become a Christian. As far as I know, guys, this is the only Christian that was praying for me. Now, she's with the Lord now. But as far as I know, that she's the only Christian who had ever prayed for me. And she prayed for me for 21 years before I got saved. But anyway, we finally, when she calmed down a little bit, she said, what are you doing up here? I said, well, I've got my grandparents and my aunt and uncle. They're all getting together tomorrow night. I'm going over to tell them about the Lord. So very gently, she tried to prepare me for the fact that might not go so well. But see, I thought, hey, man, this is as plain as the nose on your face, you know, and sure they're going to see it. She said, Lon, listen, she was so worried that I was going to get discouraged, you know, so she said, Lon, listen, don't be upset. I mean, God's got to open people's eyes, I remember her saying. God's got to make people see. People aren't going to see unless God makes them see. Maybe God hasn't opened their eyes yet. Don't be discouraged if you walk here. Oh, Cora, no. I mean, by the time I'm through explaining this to them, I mean, it's going to be clear as a bell. So I went down there, and I got started. And they were skeptical when I started, just when they saw what I looked like. And finally, I moved along, and I told them basically what I've told you, and then I told them about how I'd asked Jesus in my life. Well, I mean, that's as far as I got, you know. It's like Paul, when he stood outside, the first time he said the word Jesus, you remember that, you know, they went crazy. My uncle, I didn't know this at the time, but he was president of the Jewish Defense League in Norfolk, which is the very militant Jewish organization. I didn't know that. But I mean, to him, I mean, this was the worst, absolute worst thing that could possibly be said to him. I mean, in his mind, Adolf Hitler was a Christian. You know, the Holocaust was a Christian happening, you know. And for me to come in as a Jew and say I had received Jesus Christ means all of a sudden I'm embracing Adolf Hitler, and he went absolutely, totally bananas. I mean, I've never seen anybody go so bananas in my whole life. He picked me up physically. I don't mean metaphorically now. I mean physically, by the belt on my back and the nape of my neck, and literally threw me out of the place. And I've just never seen anybody go so crazy. So I'm standing out here on the outside, you know, I just got thrown out of somebody's house, you know, and so I went back to Cora and she said, how'd it go? And I said, didn't go so good. I was really discouraged. And she sat down and had prayer with me and opened the Bible with me, and she said, look, we need to pray for these people. I mean, it's good you went and did this, but we got to pray for these people because we got to pray God opens their eyes. My grandfather didn't talk to me for 7 years. My uncle didn't talk to me for 10. I mean, they wouldn't even say hello on the telephone. In fact, one time we were down there visiting, and my aunt, who was a little bit less upset about this, gave us a $5, I think, for Jamie. He was just a little infant. And when I talked to my uncle, I said, hey, I wanted to thank you for the gift, you know, that you gave us for Jamie. And he said, don't thank me. I didn't give it to you. I mean, that's where he was, you know. Now, I'm happy to say that now they're all talking to me. And I've had tremendous opportunities to share the Lord with them. Had the opportunity to lead my dad to Christ before he died. So, you know, there's some good things happening. And most of my relatives don't know the Lord, but we're praying for them. But after that, I hitchhiked around the country for about 6 months with my dog. And then ended up here in Washington in the winter of 71, the fall of 71. Went to work for a guy named Bill Simmer over at the Good News Mission, and from there heard about seminary, and then went on to seminary, and from seminary went on to be a teacher, and then from a teacher on to here to be your pastor, and so that's kind of the way my life has gone. You know, I started out as a research chemist and had no idea I was going to be the pastor of a local church someday. But God, you know, God has been extremely good to me. And even in the early days when there were lots of doubts, you know, when some of the old conditioning would come back and I'd say, what are you doing? You know, you're a Jew. You can't be doing this. God would just keep appealing to me and saying, but look what I've done in your life. I mean, that's not real. That's legitimate. Look at what I've done in your heart. And my father, when I led him to Christ, I'll end by telling you this. My father, when I led him to Christ, he was the hardest man I'd ever met. Spiritually. I talk about spiritual things with my family, he'd get up and leave the room. Or turn on the TV as loud as he could, you know, reasonably do it without being offensive and just stare at the TV. Wouldn't even discuss the issue with me. He was in the hospital in Charlottesville in 1976, and he was in for hepatitis. But my mom called me up and in her usual melodramatic way had me thinking he was dying. So I came down to see him real quick, you know, and I didn't know whether he was dying or not. And I walked in the hospital room, he's sitting up in the bed eating a banana, you know, and I thought his life was on the line, you know. So we got to talking. I could tell something was on his mind, you know. He said, how's the weather? Fine. How's Brenda? Fine. You know, I knew something's on this guy's mind. So he said to me, Lon, he said, you know what? He said, I've really been doing a lot of thinking lately. It's totally unsolicited. He said, and I'm really coming around to think that maybe all this stuff you've been telling me about Jesus being the Messiah might be right. Guys, I'm telling you, I really thought that they needed to clear the next bed so I could get in it, you know. I mean, I stood there saying, you know, you pray for something so long. I mean, I was praying for this man every day, sometimes several times a day, because he was very sick. He did have a heart condition. I figured he didn't have too much longer to live. He made it 7 years. But his life was always, I mean, I could have gotten a phone call any day saying, he's had another heart attack, because he had 3, and before the 4th one finally killed him. But, you know, it was almost like this was a dream. So I'm saying to myself, oh, God, you know, help me to respond to this. I mean, don't let me say a wrong word now, you know. So I said, well, Dad, I'm absolutely convinced of it. I said, but why are you saying this? I don't understand. I mean, you've never been interested. He said, well, you know, he said, I feel like I'm getting near death. And he said, I went back, I decided that I could find in Orthodox Judaism what you found in Jesus, in the Messiah. He said, I went back, I went through all the ritual, I started going every week to the synagogue. He said, he said, just recently I went to the high holiday services, Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. And he said, I was there to get some kind of assurance. He said, and I finally walked out after Yom Kippur, And I said to myself when I walked out the door, there is no assurance here. There's lots of ritual and lots of good content, but there's no assurance. I don't know anything more about where I'm going when I die than when I walked in here. He said, and that's when I began saying, you know what, maybe you were really right. He said, tell me, are you right? I said, oh, Dad, I'm telling you, I'm so right. Listen, and so I sat down, I had a tract with me, I explained the tract to him. His biggest concern was, but if I do this, I won't be Jewish anymore. And I said, Dad, that's completely false. Absolutely false. You know, this is a completion of everything that being a Jew is. Every prophet who ever lived, every man of God who ever spoke in the Old Testament, Isaiah and Jeremiah and Daniel and every one of these men were all looking forward to a Jewish man who'd be the Messiah, who'd save people from their sin by his blood. And Jesus was Jewish, and all the apostles were Jewish, and the whole early church was Jewish. And it's a complete falsehood to think you're good. You don't become a Gentile when you receive Jesus. You complete what being a Jew is all about. And he was prepared to accept that, you know. He said to me, are you still Jewish? I said, of course I am. So I left the tract with him. I figured I don't want to push it. I said, Dad, think about it overnight. Came back the next day, and he said, I really would like to do this. I don't know how to do it. So we got down right there in the hospital room and prayed and asked Jesus in his life. He died 1 week to the day. Had a heart attack while he was still in the hospital. And was dead within the week. But God was very good to him. And when I came back to visit him when he was very sick, he had his heart attack. They have one of these, he had a trach down his throat so he couldn't speak, but they have one of these little things, if you've ever seen this little laminated card where they have the alphabet on it so people in this condition can spell words out to you. And he asked for it. He was very frantic. He wanted this thing, you know. And I brought it over to him, and he spelled out L-O-R-D, Lord, A-N-D, J-E-W, Jew. And I knew exactly what he was saying to me. He was saying, I got the Lord, and I know I'm still a Jew. And that was the last thing that I recall him ever saying to me. I mean, that's the last communication I ever recall from him. But, you know, I'm confident my dad came to know the Lord and is with the Lord in heaven right now. So that gives you a little bit of background. I could fill it out with a lot more details. I could probably share all afternoon with you, really, in some of the things that God did in my life. But if you're here today and you don't know the Lord Jesus Christ, if you're here today and maybe you feel to one degree or another you're in the situation I was in, then, you know, I am convinced that the only solution to life's problems, the only solution to life's mysteries, I'm convinced the only way to have assurance after you die and the only way to really live a life that's full of peace and joy and contentment, not without problems, but with a joy and a contentment and a peace that overrides the problem, is to have that personal relationship with the God of Israel. And the personal relationship with the God of Israel comes through the Messiah, through his blood being shed so that our sins are forgiven, so that we and a holy God can be united together. And I tried everything else. I mean, you can go try them all if you want to, but I tried everything else, and tried them all with equal intensity, with equal commitment, with equal openness that they would work, and they didn't. Because I don't believe they were the truth. I believe that Jesus Christ said, I am the truth, the way, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. And so I would really challenge you, if you're where I was, if you're struggling with some of the things I was struggling with, I really believe Jesus Christ honors a sincere heart, just laying yourself open before him and saying, Lord, I don't have the resources to deal with what's happening to me. That's what I did. I said, God, I don't have the resources. I'm out of resources. I got nothing left, Lord. I don't know where to go from here. You're my last hope. And I just want to say to you, God moved in my life when that was my condition. And I look back now on that guy I just told you about, and it's almost like that's a different human being. It's almost like that's not even me anymore. It's like that was a different person back then. But it was real. It's just that God's come into my life and done so much incredible work that he just made me a new thing. And it's by his grace. I mean, it's not me. And what you see now, whatever good there is strictly a matter of Jesus Christ now taking over more and more of my life, chunk by chunk, as the years have gone by. Well, I'm sorry for taking a little longer, fellas, but I trust it's valuable for you.